Soldiers were killed and 8 wounded in a 24-hour period on the front line of the war-torn Donbass region. Here in Marianka, there are regular clashes between pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian army troops. This ministry footage purports to show the aftermath of shelling. This soldier says, sadly, they hit directly in the hospitalier's car. That's the Ukrainian medical battalion. It caught fire, he says, and the flames spread to our car, which was given to us by volunteers to help the guys. Now, he says, I have no idea how we will move around. The latest tension comes as Russia accused Ukraine of incursions into Crimea, the region it annexed after a referendum in 2014. Ukraine denies Russia's assertions. Meanwhile, Russian naval and land forces have been taking part in military training exercises in Crimea. Officials say they are rehearsing moving specialized troops, armor and technical equipment to the peninsula. Russia's defense ministry said the exercise foreshadows much larger war games in the area next month.
It was a large-scale operation against Islamic State in Syria. Turkish officials say there are more than 20 of its tanks inside Syria at the moment, and that more would be sent as required. The city of Jarablus on the border with Turkey was liberated from Islamic State at the start of this military operation. Now, the assault began at dawn on Wednesday when Turkish special forces, backed by tanks and jets, crossed the Syrian border. 70 ISIL targets were hit in the first few hours, according to the local media, the terrorists allegedly forced to flee. Now, the UN has urged Ankara to adhere to the rule of law while conducting the operation. And it comes as the US confirms it is assisting Turkey's anti-ISIL campaign in Syria.
Members of the Free Syrian Army and the residents of Jarablus have retaken the town from Islamic State militants. They have taken over government buildings. According to the news we're getting, Islamic State had to flee Jarablus.
We strongly support what the Turkish military has organized and done. We've been flying air cover for them.
However, the Turkish president has insisted that along with ISIL, the operation will also target America's allies, the Kurds. Now, the Kurds, as I said, are supported by the US. And as we'll show you on the upcoming map, only the Euphrates River now divides Turkish and Kurdish forces. Let's have a look right here. You can see the Euphrates here, and we have the Kurds on this side. We have the opposing forces over here. Washington insisting the Kurds must withdraw back across the river to their own community, or America will stop supporting the Kurds. Well, Ankara is targeting the Kurds, who they call terrorists. But the Kurds recently helped America liberate the Syrian city of Manbij. And American soldiers have even been seen fighting alongside their so-called Kurdish brothers.
I love my YPG brothers, my YPGA sisters.
This morning, our army started an operation against terrorist organizations like ISIL and the Kurdish PYD in northern Syria, who have been threatening our country.
Our Washington correspondent, Gayane Chichikan, raised this issue with the U.S. State Department.
The U.S. supports Turkey's operations in Syria, even though the Turkish president says he's going to go after not only ISIL, but also Kurdish fighters in Syria, the very Kurdish fighters whom the U.S. had supported. What would you say to those Kurds in Syria who believe they're being abandoned by the U.S.?
Okay. Well, I would dispute views that they feel that they're being abandoned. We have been very clear on our support. These have been tremendous fighters against our common enemy, which is Daesh. It's a complex issue. It's a fast-moving issue.
The U.S. has indeed been clear about its support for Kurdish fighters, as they have been Washington's main partner on the ground in Syria to fight ISIL. Just recently, they helped push ISIL out of the city of Manbij. Now, speaking in Turkey, Vice President Joe Biden tells Syrian Kurds to back off.
We have made it absolutely clear to the elements that were part of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the YPG that participated, that they must move back across the river. They cannot, will not, and under no circumstances get American support if they do not keep that commitment, period.
If we look at the map, the city of Manbij is on the side of the river that Joe Biden wants Kurdish fighters to leave. I asked the State Department if Vice President Biden's statement means that the U.S. wants Kurdish fighters to leave Manbij as well. Here. Does the U.S. call on Kurdish fighters to leave the city of Manbij, which they helped liberate from ISIL recently?
So Kurdish commanders have made commitments that they will turn over areas to local populations, as they have been so tremendously successful in liberating those areas from Daesh. We expect them to live up to those commitments. I'm not going to get into this town or this village.
U.S. officials had for months refused to choose between the allies, Kurdish fighters in Syria on the one hand and Turkey on the other. It sounds like the gist of what Washington is now telling Syrian Kurds is this: thanks for helping with ISIL, now leave, because our other ally Turkey is after you and we're not going to stop them. This leaves us with another question. With the choices that Washington is making, can it still count on Kurdish fighters to be its partner on the ground in Syria?
The Kurds are disappointed. They're not happy with what happened in terms of U.S. support for Turkey. I think on the surface, Biden wanted to happy the President Erdogan and his cohorts. On the ground in Syria, I think American officials know that the Kurds are the reliable partners. I mean, the Kurds have been the fighting spirit in the Syrian Democratic Forces. Without them, there was no progress. They live on the ground. They believe in it. They're not mercenaries. They fight for, what they believe in.
About readiness in districts bordering Ukraine and the Baltic states. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said the decision to launch war games was made by President Putin as the supreme commander-in-chief of Russia's armed forces. Shoigu added that troops in the country's southern, central, and western military districts, as well as the Air Force and paratroopers, were in full combat mode as of Thursday. NATO vowed at a summit in Warsaw in July to bolster its eastern flank to counter a resurgent Russia. Russia and NATO have been flexing their military muscles amid simmering tensions in Ukraine. Well, to discuss that further, and I joined Mr. Mark Sloboda, who is an international relations and security analyst, and he's joining us live now via Skype from Moscow. Mr. Sloboda, what kind of a message is Russia sending to NATO?
Well, these snap military exercises, I think, are less a message to NATO than they are a check of Russia's military preparedness, but also a message to the West-backed regime that seized power in Kiev a few years ago. This regime has been staging provocations in the Crimea with several attempted terrorist acts within the last month, also with attempted assassination attempts on the leaders of the Lugansk and Donetsk regions, which are breakaway from this putsch government in Kiev. The most recent of those, the attempt on Zaharchenko, just occurred in the last hours, and also an increase in the amount of shelling that Ukrainian forces are continuing across the contact line in Donbass on these republics. All of this indicates it's an indication of increasing pressure, I believe provocations to try to lure Russia into an attack. There are also signs of Ukrainian military build up across the contact line, across the border in Crimea. So I think Russia, with these snap military exercises, is actually sending a message to the regime in Kiev to try to deter them from a possible offensive attempt in Donbass.
So Mr. Sloboda, many people would say that President Putin has been very restrained in reactions to all provocations, although obviously the mainstream media would term it otherwise. But I'm wondering, how important has that restrained reaction been? How important is it that President Putin is so calculated in how he reacts?
Well, I think it's more than restrained. I think that is an understatement. In the past month, we have seen Ukrainian saboteurs, would-be terrorists in the Crimea that killed Russian servicemen and intelligence agents while being foiled in the attempt of their operations. This is a huge provocation. The shelling of from the Donbass and civilians continues unabated. The fact that Russia has not responded, they even indicated at one point that they would, that there would be a price to pay, but then seemed to back down from this, right? Realizing that the regime in Kiev is simply trying to lure them into a resumption of military activities because of their unwillingness to fulfill the Minsk's political protocols. There has actually been a lot of, shall we say, unrest in Russia that the Russian government hasn't taken firmer action. And I believe that this is a commitment that President Putin has made to seriously try to avoid military conflict with the West, which is openly backing this putsch regime in Kiev at all costs.
And we still have under a minute left, Mr. Sloboda. I want to use a phrase that President Obama used, red line. Do you think that we are approaching some sort of a red line that Russia may have about how much more it can really take?
Yeah, I think several red lines have been crossed. I mean, the most serious of those, of course, was the Western backing of a putsch in Ukraine and the subsequent military attempts of this new regime to seize control of the rest of the country. But all these continued provocations, the announcement of the permanent stationing of NATO troops, the activation of missile defense in Romania, in Romania and soon to be in Poland, all of this are red lines for Russia. In fact, recently the Russian president made a statement to some German journalists saying that he doesn't understand why you and why your audience isn't scared, because I'm scared about the situation and I don't know how to get through to you how serious it is anymore. So I think that's an indication of how far Russia feels pushed on its red lines.
Toronto were also hit especially hard and extensive damage is likely. Officials say this is a mountainous region and the tricky terrain is hampering rescue efforts. There have been about 60 aftershocks since the initial quake. Strong tremors have also been felt in the country's capital, Rome. Meanwhile, China says it's ready to provide assistance to the quake-hit region.
Are wishing to dissolve the nation, a majority now, if Hillary is elected president. According to Will Axford at The Cron, he's reporting that if anyone needs proof that the presidential race between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton truly is dividing the country, they need to look to Texas. He writes that according to a poll from public policy polling that was released on Tuesday, 3 out of 5 Texans who support Donald Trump said they would support seceding from America if Hillary Clinton becomes president. They write here that data from the left-leaning polling firm shows that Trump leads Clinton by a margin of 50 to 44% in Texas. They write that this is far from the landslide win from Mitt Romney in the 2012 election 4 years ago, where Romney beat President Barack Obama 57.2% to 41.4%. Now, according to the poll, they state here that one out of 4 Texans support seceding from America generally. But when faced with the possibility of a President Hillary Clinton, a majority of Texans said that they'd rather leave. Now, this sort of falls in line with some of the rhetoric and things we've been hearing from some of our guests lately. Of course, we've interviewed Harry Dent. He stated that America is divided and there will be a great split if Hillary Clinton comes into office. Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, said the very same thing. So the sentiments are starting to surface in these polls in Texas now. So we're going to continue to follow that. Do you really think that Texas is going to secede from the nation? Do you think there will be an actual move? Who knows?
As activists are calling for the evacuation of U.S. troops in talks with Pyongyang, South Korean President Park Geun-hye has called on the army to retaliate any possible provocation by the North. Press TV correspondent Frank Smith reports from Seoul.
South Korean President Park Geun-hye convened her National Security Council as joint U.S.-South Korea military drills began this week. The drills have drawn strong rebuke from Pyongyang. President Park calls on her forces to maintain vigilance.
As the possibility of a North Korean provocation is higher than ever, and the North's nuclear capabilities and missiles are direct and real threats, the drill should be like an actual fight that prepares for North Korea's provocations. The government and the army should be fully ready for possible North Korean provocations using the UFG exercise as an excuse, and thoroughly retaliate if it makes a provocation.
Activists in Seoul voiced opposition to the annual, mostly computer-based drills called Ulchi Freedom Guardian. Many view the U.S. behind much of the tension in the region.
The U.S. manipulates contention between people of the same nation and uses that as an excuse to intensify the arms race and to sell weapons. President Park's administration, which is blindly serving America's interest, is a perfect example of submissive diplomacy. The U.S. and Park administration should immediately stop military drills for nuclear war, remove U.S. forces, and work for independent, peaceful reunification.
South Korea conducted its largest ever. Activists in Seoul voiced opposition to the annual, mostly computer-based drills called Ulchi Freedom Guardian. Many view the U.S. behind much of the tension in the region.
The U.S. manipulates contention between people of the same nation and uses that as an excuse to intensify the arms race and to sell weapons. President Park's administration, which is blindly serving America's interest, is a perfect example of submissive diplomacy. The U.S. and Park administration should immediately stop military drills for nuclear war, remove U.S. forces, and work for independent, peaceful reunification.
South Korea conducted its largest ever artillery drills near the DMZ last week, and the U.S. recently moved nuclear-capable B-1B bombers to Guam. South Korea also has plans to deploy more ballistic and new cruise missiles this fall. North Korea has warned of a nuclear war over the joint U.S.-South Korea drills, which this year involve about 25,000 American troops. South Korea's military development may expand beyond conventional arms. A recent forum hosted by leading lawmakers at the country's National Assembly has outlined a roadmap for South Korea to develop its own nuclear weapons.